It began the day Mira stopped dancing, not because her legs had grown tired, nor because the rhythm had faded from the songs she once cherished, but because something vibrant and fiercely alive within her had gradually fallen silent, slipping away so softly she barely noticed it leaving. There was no grand moment of collapse, no dramatic break, or a single turning point she could pinpoint to explain it. Instead, it was a gradual fading, like ink dissipating in water, one subtle compromise at a time. A truth softly buried beneath a gentle smile, a whispered yes when her heart cried out no, a moment when she withheld her laughter because the room seemed too quiet, too serious for the fullness of her joy. Mira had once danced her way through life, not for applause, not for validation, but because her soul insisted on expression. Her kitchen tiles had known the warmth of her bare feet, moving gracefully while making morning coffee. Street lamps had watched her spin under their golden glow, unafraid of curious eyes. Supermarket aisles had echoed softly with her hummed melodies, spontaneous and unapologetic. She laughed freely at memories that surfaced unexpectedly and wept openly when beauty touched her deeply. She lived unguarded, with a spirit that filled every space it entered. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to notice that her unfiltered joy drew sideways glances rather than shared smiles. Her spontaneity seemed to disturb rather than delight, and in the delicate silence that followed, Mira learned not to stop dancing altogether, but to dance quietly, carefully, invisibly, until her movements became so small they ceased to exist. You see, it isn't always someone else's harshness that makes you shrink. Often, it's the quiet anticipation of their discomfort. It's the learned habit of softening your voice, dimming your brilliance, and withholding your truth, not out of humility, but from a subtle fear that your full presence might unsettle those around you. And bit by bit, you reshape yourself into something less threatening, something less demanding, something easier to love. In this quiet transformation, you become the reliable friend, the dependable listener, the steady presence. You remember birthdays and anniversaries, respond to late-night messages with unwavering patience, and absorb disappointments without complaint. People begin to adore you, not for the depth of your spirit, not for your unguarded authenticity, but for the gentle silence you maintain, a silence that keeps their worlds undisturbed and comfortable. But what happens when the dancer no longer hears the music inside her? What happens to a heart that continuously shapes itself around other people's expectations? You feel it first as a strange numbness in the moments that used to ignite joy. The books you once loved feel distant. The songs you cherished play without resonance. The conversations you once anticipated feel hollow. And one ordinary day, perhaps while glancing in the mirror or pausing at a traffic light, you suddenly see a stranger staring back, and the question emerges from somewhere deep and tender. Who have I become? The grief that follows this recognition isn't loud. It's a subtle ache, profound and relentless. The kind that sits quietly beside you as you realize you've been mourning your own gradual disappearance. It is not the grief of loss, but of remembrance, the remembering of who you were before you traded authenticity for acceptance, before your truth was exchanged for a quieter peace. So let me gently ask you now, without judgment, without expectation, when was the last time you spoke words fully and entirely your own, without adjusting them to soften their impact or to ease someone else's discomfort? When was the last time you filled a space confidently, not out of rebellion or pride, but simply because you knew you belonged there? When was the last time your laughter erupted spontaneously, freely, without a second thought of how it might echo in the quiet around you? Because coming home to yourself isn't an act of defiance. It's a deep, tender act of remembrance. It is the shedding of layers that were never yours to begin with, the rediscovery of a voice that has waited patiently for you to reclaim it. It is the slow, courageous choice to listen again to the music that never stopped playing, even when you stopped dancing. And that part of you, the vibrant, unedited, authentic self, is still there, quietly hopeful, not resentful, not wounded beyond repair, but simply waiting with infinite patience for you to recognize the melody still humming softly beneath the surface. Today, perhaps, is the day you choose to listen again. Today is the day you begin to move, not to please or placate, but to reclaim the joy of living fully, unapologetically, entirely as yourself. It happened for the first time in the most ordinary of moments, on a Tuesday evening that felt no different from any other, standing frozen in the aisle of a grocery store, holding 2 jars of tomato sauce. Her gaze flickered between them, caught in a trivial choice, when suddenly a sharp, unfamiliar voice sliced through her mind. Who is this? Not the woman standing indecisively in the fluorescent-lit aisle, but the woman she had become. A stranger to her own tastes, her own certainty, someone so disconnected from her inner voice that even the simplest choice had become paralyzing. She remembered a time, not so long ago, when decisions came from instinct rather than analysis. A time when cooking dinner meant dancing barefoot in the kitchen, tossing ingredients together with joy rather than caution, guided only by what felt right rather than what was expected. But now every choice was an exercise in hesitation. Every decision a careful calculation to avoid displeasure or disappointment. Every movement choreographed to meet the invisible expectations of an audience she never wanted. Have you ever stood in front of a mirror and felt that jarring sense of distance, as if the reflection gazing back at you belongs to someone else entirely? A reflection shaped and softened by countless small concessions, each made so quietly you barely noticed them, until their cumulative weight reshaped your very identity. This isn't about loud, dramatic betrayals or explosive arguments. It's about the subtle erosion of self, one quiet compromise after another, until the fabric of your life fits everyone except you. Consider Jonah, a man who wore his reliability like armor, always dependable, always the calm amidst chaos, always choosing harmony over authenticity. He became so adept at being what others needed that he forgot what it felt like to need something for himself. Until one evening, walking home beneath a sky growing dark, Jonah passed a street musician strumming a tune he hadn't heard in years, a melody from a freer, more vibrant time when life felt expansive and full of possibility. The music swept over him, stirring something long dormant, a flicker of the boy who once sang loudly and laughed without concern. But then came the grief, not because the song was sad, but because it reminded him vividly of everything he'd quietly surrendered to keep others comfortable, the passions he'd gently silenced to maintain peace. And perhaps, like Jonah, you found yourself wondering whose reflection you're maintaining each day, whose peace you're protecting with your silence, whose comfort has become more valuable than your truth. You begin to recognize the subtle tragedy in how easily you have become fluent in everyone else's desires, how naturally you have adapted your heart and voice until you've forgotten the language of your own soul. Yet here lies the hidden beauty of such profound forgetting. If you can forget who you truly are, you can also remember. You can rediscover the quiet voice within you that once whispered, clearly and confidently, "This matters to me." You can revisit the version of yourself who moved through the world unguarded, whose laughter didn't seek permission, whose heart was courageous enough to be imperfect and unafraid. Tonight, before sleep claims you and the world rushes back in tomorrow, stand before your reflection, not with criticism or disappointment, but with tenderness. Look yourself in the eyes, the very eyes that have quietly witnessed every compromise, and ask softly, gently, what if I stopped vanishing? What if I was never too much, just never truly seen? What if today is the day I refuse to earn worthiness and instead simply claim it? Because the reflection you're searching for is not lost. It merely waits beneath the layers you've worn for too long. It awaits the moment you choose to remove the mask, meet your own gaze without flinching, and finally, powerfully, recognize the self you were always meant to be. He was the kind of man who made everything seem effortless, the one who could remember birthdays without reminders, who knew exactly when to offer comfort and precisely how much silence someone else's pain required. Raphael had spent a lifetime carefully sculpting himself into someone others could lean on, someone dependable, predictable, reliable, someone who made everyone feel at ease, except himself. On the outside, his life was immaculate. Every piece neatly placed, every milestone gracefully achieved. There were photographs to prove it. Smiling faces, framed certificates, family gatherings that looked warm and inviting. His was the sort of presence people gravitated towards, the comforting stillness of a sturdy lighthouse amid a storm. And yet, no one ever stopped to consider if the lighthouse itself felt the weight of guiding others safely to shore. Until one evening, Raphael found himself lingering in his car, parked outside his own home, watching through the window at a scene so familiar yet strangely distant. He saw the soft glow of lights he'd installed, furniture he'd chosen, walls he'd painted, but all of it felt like an elaborate stage set, beautifully crafted but belonging to someone else's play. He sat there, frozen not by indecision, but by a creeping realization that pressed against his chest and whispered, "Whose life am I living?" It wasn't a sudden crisis or a dramatic collapse. It was a quiet, relentless erosion. Each compromise was subtle, nodding when he wanted to question, smiling when he needed to scream, accepting what he wanted to refuse, all to maintain peace that felt more like surrender. And bit by bit, compromise after compromise, Raphael had slowly vanished within his own life. Have you felt that? The subtle emptiness of waking up in a life that fits you perfectly on paper, but leaves you silently suffocating. A life built meticulously from expectations and obligations, each step carefully measured to avoid disappointment, each decision quietly vetted to guarantee acceptance, until one day you no longer recognize your own reflection, and your heart aches with the question, how did I get here? Because it's not the sudden storm that erodes our shores, it's the quiet, relentless wave of daily self-abandonment. It's every silence chosen over truth, every yes uttered through clenched teeth, every dream tucked away because it seemed too loud or too inconvenient for the comfortable narrative others had already written for us. Raphael had never intended to disappear. He never meant to become an echo of someone else's expectations. But with every gesture of quiet compliance, with every unspoken truth, he built walls around his own heart. Walls he believed would keep him safe, but ended up locking him inside a carefully curated museum of someone he no longer recognized. So, let me gently but firmly ask you this now. Whose version of success have you been chasing? Whose peace have you prioritized over your own voice? Whose comfort has your silence protected? And at what point did you begin believing that shrinking yourself was a price worth paying for acceptance? The painful truth, the one Raphael faced in that parked car, is that the applause we receive for playing roles that aren't ours to begin with, though loud and comforting, is meaningless if our true selves remain unseen. The people who praise our reliability rarely notice the quiet grief behind our careful smiles. They seldom ask if we're happy, genuinely happy, beneath the polished exterior we've presented to the world, because acknowledging your discomfort would mean acknowledging their role in it. And yet, even within this heaviness, there lies a precious clarity, an awakening that begins the moment we dare to question the life we've passively accepted. Raphael didn't tear his life apart overnight. He simply began, little by little, to reclaim the parts of himself he had silenced. He let himself say, "I'm not sure," instead of agreeing immediately. He began to linger in conversations longer, expressing desires he had previously swallowed. He allowed himself to breathe before responding, no longer performing, but reflecting honestly, authentically, from the quiet sanctuary of his own heart. And in that gentle rebellion, something sacred stirred within him. Not the fiery blaze of overnight transformation, but a subtle warmth, a quiet assurance that whispered, "You are allowed to live, not just survive." Now, I turn this gentle yet pressing question towards you. What quiet truths have you buried to avoid discomfort? What dreams have you postponed because they didn't neatly fit into someone else's expectations? And what would happen if, just once, you chose honesty over harmony, authenticity over acceptance, realness over a role? This isn't about tearing down the life you've built. It's about examining, carefully and compassionately, the foundation it stands upon. It's about choosing yourself, not out of selfishness, but out of necessity. Because a life spent quietly fading away behind a carefully maintained image is no life at all. It's merely survival in slow motion. Your real life begins the day you stop rehearsing someone else's script, the day you decide that your story is worth telling without editing it for applause. The moment you say clearly, gently, firmly, "This is my life, and I refuse to disappear in it any longer." Because you were never meant to silently vanish in the background of your own existence. You were meant to be fully seen, fully heard, fully alive, without apology, and maybe, just maybe, today is the day you begin to remember exactly what that feels like. It doesn't come with a loud crash or some cinematic climax where everything dramatically aligns. Instead, it arrives gently, so softly you almost overlook it. A moment that appears so ordinary, so deceptively insignificant, that only the deepest, truest part of you, the part that's been silently waiting for years, will recognize it when it finally emerges. Maybe it comes while you're standing in your kitchen, your hands submerged in warm, soapy water, staring blankly out the window at a familiar street. Or maybe it finds you on a rainy afternoon as your reflection gazes quietly back from a fogged-up mirror, revealing a clarity you've spent years avoiding. And in this unexpected stillness, in that sacred, fragile pause, a voice deep within whispers a truth you've danced around but never fully embraced. I don't need permission to be myself anymore. And this revelation, though soft and barely audible, echoes powerfully through every moment you once reduced yourself to fit into, every silence you mistook for peace, and every carefully constructed mask you wore believing that earning love meant surrendering your own authenticity. It's the moment you realize you can finally stop performing the act of being you. It's the precise instant when your voice no longer seeks approval or adapts itself to soothe another's discomfort. The instant you stop dimming your natural brilliance just to prevent shadows from falling on those unwilling or unable to grow in its glow. The instant you cease folding your dreams, desires, and truths into convenient, easily digestible shapes just to avoid disturbing anyone else's carefully maintained equilibrium. Because the uncomfortable truth, the one you've quietly known but rarely confronted, is that the world rarely asks you outright to disappear. Instead, it gently applauds each act of your disappearance. It celebrates your quiet conformity, praises your humility at the cost of your honesty, and cheerfully labels you as someone who's easy to be around, simply because you've masterfully learned how to minimize your presence so others never have to stretch beyond their comfort zones. But today, something within you refuses to fade away any longer. Not from anger, not from defiance, but from a quiet and powerful reverence for the truth of who you always were. Beneath all those layers of carefully crafted silence, you can sense it now, can't you? All those countless moments you waited for validation that was never truly theirs to bestow. Every breath held back in anticipation of an invitation to belong, as if worthiness needed the stamp of someone else's approval. Each second, you turned your own truth into background noise, quietly hoping that eventually, someone would pause long enough to ask you who you really were. But now you understand. They were never going to ask. Not because your truth wasn't worthy of being heard, but because it never occurred to them what it cost you to hold it back. And so, here you stand, not shattered, but awakening, burning brightly through every last thread of the persona you've carefully woven just to survive. You're no longer pleading to be recognized. You're learning to recognize yourself. Within this newfound clarity, there's no begging, no performance, only profound, unapologetic presence. So let me gently ask you now, not expecting a quick answer, but rather inviting you to explore deep within the silent sanctuary of your heart. What if you finally stopped needing anyone to approve of how you breathe or how deeply you feel? What if today was the day you ceased apologizing for your intensity, your depth, your clarity, for simply taking up space? What if you finally understood, in the core of your being, that you were never too much, but simply surrounded by those who couldn't hold your fullness? And what if today, this moment, this breath, this courageous choice, marks not merely another chapter, but the very first one you've authored entirely in your own words, in your own voice? with a pen held firmly in a hand that no longer trembles, because this isn't the end of your story. This is the quiet, yet profound return to yourself, to the fire that never truly died, but simply waited patiently beneath the ashes, to the gentle strength you once mistakenly labeled as weakness, yet was always your deepest power, and to the peace that, for the first time, won't demand your disappearance as the price of belonging. So, come home now, not to the person others comfortably accepted, not to the mask you wore just to ensure your safety, but to the soul who never once stopped whispering in your quietest moments, "There must be more to life than this," because there is. And it all begins right now, with the courageous reclaiming of your voice. Unedited, unapologetic, unmistakably yours. Welcome back. You have waited long enough.